Hello, everyone out there. You are listening to the podcast Cuban Missile Crisis and Cold War Tensions. Speakers are Usirbaeva Amina and Talat Qazaidana.
So, what is Cuban Missile Crisis? The Cuban Missile Crisis occurred in October 1962 between the United States and the Soviet Union. Although it lasted only 13 days, but it is considered as one of the most intense moments of the Cold War, because it brought the world to the brink of nuclear war, which could lead to big consequences and losses all around the world. The crisis began when an American reconnaissance aircraft discovered in Cuba the construction sites of Soviet missiles capable of reaching major US cities. The discovery led to a series of tense negotiations between the two superpowers and raised concerns about a potential nuclear exchange.
Indeed, it intensified the already high level of anxiety stemming from the ongoing Cold War. The world reacted with profound concern and fear of potential nuclear conflict between the US and the Soviet Union. Countries worldwide were on edge, with many calling for peaceful resolution to the crisis. For example, European allies, particularly those in NATO, stood in solidarity with the United States and supported its efforts to resolve the crisis diplomatically. The United Nations, on the other hand, called emergency sessions to discuss the crisis and urged both states to seek a peaceful resolution through a dialogue. And of course, there were nations within non-aligned movement seeking to avoid aligning with either superpower, also calling for de-escalation. But how did it start? Because there must have been key events leading to Cuban crisis.
Yes, exactly. There were several events that started the crisis. The discovery of an American reconnaissance aircraft on October 14, 1962, photographic evidence of Soviet missile sites in Cuba was handed over to President Kennedy. To discuss and develop a response to Soviet missiles, President Kennedy convened the Executive Committee on the National Security Council.
Well, we should take into account Fidel Castro's charismatic leadership. He played a significant role in the events leading up to and during the Cuban Missile Crisis. He came to power after the Cuban Revolution in 1959, overthrowing the US-backed regime of Batista. His revolutionary government quickly implemented socialist reforms and established closer ties with the USSR instead. Castro's desire for solidarity and protection heavily influenced this situation. The USA itself responded with a failed attempt to invade Cuba, an episode known as Bay of Pigs. Castro's advocacy for a strong Soviet reply, including the use of nuclear weapons if attacked, added complexity to the negotiations and contributed to the tensions.
So let's move on to the major decisions made by President John Kennedy during that period. On October 22, 1962, President John Kennedy addressed the nation by announcing the existence of missile bases and imposing a naval quarantine, calling it a quarantine rather than a blockade to avoid an act of war. On the same day, he publicly demanded that Soviet missiles be removed from Cuba and stated in a television address that the United States would not tolerate the existence of offensive nuclear weapons in the Western Hemisphere. It was a strategic step to exert pressure without immediately escalating the situation. But despite this, Kennedy was looking for diplomatic solutions. He entered into secret correspondence with Soviet Prime Minister Nikita Khrushchev, exploring options for a peaceful settlement as both presidents wanted to avoid war.
To do so, Kennedy and Khrushchev maintained direct contact through various means, including a hotline established between the White House and the Kremlin. They exchanged multiple letters during the crisis expressing concerns, intentions, and proposals. Moreover, both leaders carefully crafted their public statement to balance restraints. Additionally, there were lesser-known aspects in behind-the-scenes negotiations that contributed significantly to the crisis resolution. Firstly, apart from public exchanges and official channels, Kennedy and Khrushchev engaged in secret communications through various back channels. For instance, Attorney General Robert Kennedy, the president's brother, communicated with the Soviet ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin. This discussion allowed for more candid conversations and exploration of potential solutions away from the public eye. Secondly, U-Tan, the Secretary General of the United Nations, engaged in private discussions with both superpowers, acting as an intermediary and conveying messages between Kennedy and Khrushchev, contributing to a more nuanced understanding of each other's position.
Discussion continued throughout the crisis. During this period, tensions increased, and some American military commanders insisted on immediate strikes on missile sites. At the same time, Kennedy ordered the military to prepare for a potential military strike on Cuba. He has explored various military options, including airstrikes and an invasion to destroy the missiles if diplomatic efforts fail. Kennedy decided on a risky act, hiding from his administrative and political entourage by sending a private letter to Khrushchev. The letter stated that the United States publicly commits not to invade Cuba and the United States is dismantling its missiles in Turkey. This secret agreement helped defuse the crisis. And on October 28, 1962, the crisis was finally resolved when Khrushchev agreed to withdraw Soviet missiles from Cuba in exchange for a public promise by the United States not to invade Cuba. In addition, the United States secretly agreed to take its missiles out of Turkey, but this part of the deal was not publicly disclosed.
So, to reach the concluding point of our discussion, how did the Cold War context, with its ongoing tension between two superpowers, set the stage for the Cuban Missile Crisis to become such a pivotal moment in global politics?
The Cuban Missile Crisis escalated the rivalry of US and USSR to a dangerous level. It brought the world to the brink of nuclear war, highlighting the fragility of global stability under the shadow of the superpower conflict. The crisis marked a moment of intense nuclear brinkmanship and demonstrated the need for diplomatic resolution to prevent catastrophic consequences in the face of such geopolitical confrontations.